Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and today we're kicking off a mini-series all about the topic that perhaps more people know telegeography for than any other: submarine cables. To start off the series, I have my colleague Lane Burdette, expert and nerd on all things submarine cable. We start with a refresher on the cables themselves and put together all of the components that go into building them and lighting them for data transmission service. We then get into the cost of these individual elements and then how to construct the larger cost of building a submarine cable. We look at who builds these cables and why, then how the cable builders actually make money on their investment through selling data services, and get into why submarine cable prices vary all around the world. Finally, we look at how supply and demand are likely to develop in this vast undersea market and what Lane sees for the future of cable profitability. This series will give us a great chance across several episodes to take a deeper dive, pun very much intended, into a key area of the global telecom business to get a broader understanding than we can in our normal one-off interviews. As always, please like and subscribe to the show, leave a review, tell a friend, and feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever you can find me with feedback or ideas about the show. Thanks for listening, and on to Lane. So, Lane, anyone who follows this podcast is certainly familiar with the fact that the majority of intercontinental traffic goes through submarine cables. But today I brought you on specifically to talk about the economics of all of that. So, Lane, please introduce yourself and tell us what you do at Telegeography.
Sure. It's good to be here, Greg. So, I'm Lane.
Thanks.
I'm a senior analyst at Telegeography. Been here for a couple years now. I focus on subcables, data centers. I do some of our network research. Um, I help edit submarineCableMap.com. That's a fun part of
Excellent.
my job. And
Yeah.
then I talk to people like you about the internet and subcables and how they work.
Cool. And that submarinecablemap.com is probably, did I say that right? Submarinecablemap.com?
Oh, yeah.
Probably our most used resource ultimately, isn't it? So,
Yeah, it's often what we're known for and how people get
yeah.
introduced to telegeography. But as you know, we
Yeah.
have discussed here, we do a lot more than that.
Of course. Yes. Well, I'm glad because I don't really work on submarine cables. So excellent. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you so much. Well, very welcome to the show again. Actually, we've talked before on our transport episode about submarine cables, and of course, everybody listening to the show is aware they exist and roughly what they do. But I did still want to start with just kind of a little bit of a primer on exactly what submarine cables are and ultimately how their owners make money. Um, and that's why one of the reasons I had you on, Lane, is that you are so skilled at explaining this, right? So could you just take us through physically what is a submarine cable?
No pressure. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So a submarine cable, subcables are the physical components of the internet that go underneath the water, at the very bottom of the ocean, and connect continents and different countries, etc., all together and form this like critical piece of the internet as we know it. They're very small. Typical comparison would be like a garden hose, and then the optical fibers themselves that are inside of that are even smaller, so it's going to be like the size of human hair and smaller
Mm,
than that even.
that is
um,
crazy.
no, it's wild to think about. It's honestly, it's one of my favorite things on earth is subsea cables. um, when we're thinking about the technology and the equipment, et cetera, that's involved in these things, we typically divide it into two parts, and that's going to be the dry plant and the wet plant.
Mm,
As it sounds, the wet plant is everything that's under the water. So this is the cable itself. It's going to be the repeaters, like the optical amplifiers that are spaced evenly along the systems if they're really long. Um, Not all cables are simple, like point to point. Maybe there's a
mm,
branching unit in the middle to kind of connect different parts and segments of the cable. All of that is going to be part of the wet. And then the dry includes the cable landing station, the beach manhole, any equipment inside the landing station that's going to be the actual transmissions equipment that's called the SLTE, the
mm,
power
mhm.
feeding equipment, like network visibility stuff, security, all of that is in the cable landing station. And then from there, it connects to terrestrial networks.
Gotcha. And you mentioned power at the cable landing station, often called CLS. We love to help people cut through the acronyms, right? That power has to send the power all along the entirety of the submarine cable. How does that work?
Yeah, so there's copper, right, in the actual subsea
Hmm.
cable. It's going to be polyethylene, so it's little white plasticky poly around the outside. There's steel, there's copper, and then there's the optical fibers themselves. So that power gets transmitted, and its purpose is to power the repeaters.
Right.
Um, what the repeaters are and why they're necessary, just briefly. Optical signal cannot travel endlessly, right?
Hmm.
At some point, it is going to attenuate and diminish in strength. So, to repropagate that signal and keep it going over long distances, like you're going to need to cross the oceans, there are these repeaters and they're huge. They're like the size of a person laying down alongside this cable, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and that takes the optical signal, uses the power from the shore, and resends it along. And that's going to be every like 60, 80 kilometers along these undersea systems.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Wait, just dumb question here. Would you have power coming from either end of the cable?
I don't know. I think so.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't
yeah,
feel like there would be a certain direction you have to do
yeah,
it from.
right. Okay, interesting. All right, all right. So, Lane, let's say we have a packet of data, right? And that packet of data needs to get from the demarcation point, if you will, of a terrestrial network on one continent to a terrestrial network on the other continent. Take us through the journey. How do these segments all work? How does that packet of data move through those places?
Yeah, so we rely on subsea cables all of the time. Um, Greg, you and I are talking. We're both in the DC area, so maybe not right
Mhm.
now, but anytime I talk to
Well,
Alan, who's
across
based
the Potomac, at
oh
least
yes,
I'm west of you, right? So,
funny.
yeah,
Yeah, but I talk to Alan all the time, right? And Alan's based out
right.
of Slovakia. He's our one of our heads of research here. So when I'm on a call with him, the data is going to go in a packet, right, from my computer to maybe a network consolidation point, a central office in my neighborhood where it's going to meet up with other, houses and lines to there. My network operator or my internet service provider is going to take that and pass it along bigger and bigger pipes of network until eventually it hits the cable landing station. From there, yeah, it goes undersea. It's going to be buried. Subsea cables are buried close to shore and then laid on the seafloor as they go further out into the deep sea. And then it repeats the entire process again on the other side.
Excellent. I mean, that is it's truly a fascinating aspect of our world when you think about it, right? So that it all works that way, right? But okay, so these packets of data need this infrastructure to get from one continent to another. Who does all of this? Who owns these submarine cables and why?
Yeah, that's a really important trend as it's something that's been shifting in the industry over the last like 15 years. So around 2010, the majority of used international bandwidth was going to be kind of held or used by called like traditional backbone providers. So this
Hmm.
is your AT&T, Telstra, um, Telecom Egypt. Pick your
Right.
favorite global telco.
Incumbent telecom providers from around the world, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So they were the majority users of international bandwidth, and because of that, they were the majority builders of subsea cable. Subsea cables are really big investments. It's kind of this big upfront cost that might pay dividends later on as you use that capacity for your network or sell it to others to do the same. So these companies, these backbone providers would get together in what is called like consortiums, right?
Hmm.
To pool this initial cost in order to split the capacity later on.
Right.
So these traditional telcos, they're still involved in the subsea cable, but the amount of international bandwidth that they're using is now lesser compared to what the content providers are using.
Hmm.
So in like 2010 ish, internet backbone providers were using like 75% of international bandwidth, and that has
Right.
decreased substantially. That's like 20%, right? And the content
Wow. Yeah.
providers are that big 75% chunk today. The
Hmm.
content
Hmm.
providers is a much smaller group of companies. This
Right.
is Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft.
Right.
It's other smaller level companies like Alibaba, right? It's anyone doing
Hmm.
like CDN content, networks, social media sites, cloud platforms, all that good
Right.
stuff. What we love to use every day, right?
Right. What makes the internet these days anyway. Yeah. So
Yes, totally. Um, yeah, so they have such intense and just massive bandwidth requirements now. And I should say, the amount that's used by internet backbone providers never went down, right?
right,
That
right.
that
It's just that
number
that part
and
grew so much. Yeah.
yes, yeah, that the
Yeah,
internet
that is
backbone providers
fascinating.
are using more than they used to, but their
Hmm.
share has decreased because of the massive growth that these content providers have had over the last decade or two.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these guys, these companies now, because their requirements are so great, are investing in subsea cables, sometimes on their own, singly.
Mm.
These companies do
Like, so
other
not a
things.
part of a consortium, although I'm sure that happens too, but
Yeah,
just
both.
like I Meta or I Google own this submarine cable.
Yes. And they've got deep pockets. It's not as big of an investment as it is for other types of companies. So
Right.
they can pull that off a little easier.
Hmm. Excellent. That is really fascinating, and I think it's a great way to set up the sort of heart of the conversation that I want to have with you, Lane, which is all about the economics of submarine cables. Like, is the essential question that I want us to attempt to answer here, such as it is, right, is how do you make money owning and operating submarine cables, right? So I think that setup is going to mean that the answer is more complicated than it might have been, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, which is always fun. But what we're going to have to do, I think, first is to sort of build things up. So what I want to start asking you about is just that we know that these submarine cables are long, big projects. We want to build up how much it actually costs to do one of these projects. Obviously, that's going to differ a lot depending on the physical geography and things like that. But let's go through it. Just like build it up for us. How much does it cost to build a submarine cable? Knowing that you're going to have a bunch of caveats to answer that, right? So,
Oh yes. Well, of course it varies by route.
right.
But it's going to be measured in millions. Pretty comfortably, it's going to be millions.
Hmm. Hmm.
So a transatlantic system, which is like 7,000 kilometers, that might
Okay.
run 250 million these days.
Wow, a
And
quarter of a
then,
billion dollars. That is that
yes,
it's like honestly more than I thought, and I've been doing this a long time, right? So yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
they're pretty major investments.
Hmm.
And the Trans-Pacific is about twice as big as the
Hmm.
transatlantic, right? So you're going to require a
Hmm.
lot more kilometers of fiber. Cost of that is like 400 million.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Crazy. All right. And so across the entire world, then, what is the industry putting into new cables in a typical year in recent years?
Yeah, about 2 billion,
Wow.
if
Okay.
you can
Yeah.
believe it.
So
Yes.
yeah.
It's a lot of money, and that's just based on the RFS dates of new cables. So
Hmm.
that is the capital that goes into building new systems
Right.
and does not also include like the operational cost.
Operating. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So then presumably that means we're going to get to like there is a lot of money to be made here if we're investing that much. What is the current build environment look like? Like what kind of projects are we tracking to come online in the next couple of years?
Yeah, we have a ton of new cables planned. And I will warn at the beginning is right now we track obviously which cables are announced and what we are hearing from people at conferences about what's coming into service and when. Also, these projects get pushed all of the time due to
Sure, they're
regulatory
big
issues.
projects, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Hmm.
yeah, they take years to plan, years to execute. So we have some really big numbers coming up, but it's probable that at least some of these are going to get pushed.
Right.
So for the next several years, looking at like end of year 25 and then 26 and 27, it's like 4
Mhm.
billion a year, which
Wow.
you'll note is
Yeah.
double, right? The
Yeah. So
previous
so we're
average.
ramping up cable expansion right now. It
Yes.
looks like potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Interesting.
over 70 planned systems for the next several
Hmm.
years.
Yeah. Well, I do hear that the internet is going to be a big deal. So,
Yes.
so yeah,
I don't think I don't
yeah,
think it'll be that important moving forward, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
we can.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a testament to how much bandwidth demand keeps growing. Like I look at this in my own little world of enterprise networks and things like that, and it's just every time you think that, oh, okay, well, how much more could bandwidth grow? We're streaming movies online and things like that. It still does. AI is
Yes.
maybe going to be the next big push for that and things like that. So the people who supply certainly think that the demand of bandwidth has to keep going there. So
I was just gonna say for context here for the listeners, bandwidth
mhm.
demand at this point is doubling about every 3 years.
Interesting. That's
So it is
specific to submarine cables, right? So
no, that's international bandwidth use.
international. Gotcha. Gotcha. All
Yes.
right. Yeah, that is
Just
incredible. Yeah.
absolutely massive. Like I can't think of another industry that's
Right.
growing
Right.
so consistently at such
Hmm.
a high rate.
And yet, as we shall see, the area where I have some expertise here is that the prices for that are always falling. So there's an
Of
interesting
course.
dynamic there, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
as
yeah.
supply goes
Yeah.
up, price goes down, and we are
Right.
always adding supply, so
Right.
price continues to fall.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll definitely get to that. So to build up to that,
Of
right?
course.
We've gotten some top line numbers from you. What are the actual sort of capex components, and in rough figures here that you might have to hand, how much do those components contribute to that $250 million dollars price tag for transatlantic, 400 million for trans-Pacific, et cetera?
Yeah, so the cost of the cable itself is not a consistent thing, right?
Hmm.
There's no uh, single right. If measure it in like route kilometers, right? Like the
By the
price
cable
per
itself, you mean
kilometer.
the physical thing, the bundle of
Yes,
fibers and power, copper and steel shielding and so things
yes,
like
and
that.
the poly everything. Like when you're
And why
if
does
I was
that
to
vary
hold it
so
in my
much?
hand,
Right.
the optical, yeah, the
Right.
system here. So we measure that in kilometers, right? And the price
Hmm.
per kilometer is going to vary, and part of that is going to be based on the armoring that's required. So
Mm-hmm.
cables break all of the time, and they
Right.
break most frequently near shore.
Right.
Most of the reason that cables break would be considered like accidental interaction with humans, right? So if someone is
Fishing and
trawling,
anchors and
fishing,
yeah.
yes, anything like that happens over a system that can cause a fault. To
Hmm.
make cables stronger near the shore, they wrap extra steel around them, and that's called a layer
Mm-hmm.
of armoring.
Mm-hmm.
They are also going to bury them, ideally,
Ah, right.
especially in the
So the cost per kilometer might include that, like you have to dig a trench here instead of just drop it, right? So
yes, it's going to up the
got
install
it.
cost. It's going to up the cable cost, everything.
Hmm.
So the cable in deep water is actually easier to lay and cheaper, even though it's so far down, so unaccessible, right?
Right.
Compared to the near shore that's actually at higher risk and has to be better invested, better protected.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then within the cable itself, we also have the number of optical fibers that are included.
Right.
So cables that have more fibers in them are going to have more capacity to sell, but they're
Hmm.
also going to cost more on like a like per kilometer basis. So if you're looking for vague numbers,
Hmm.
think this whole thing can vary from like 6,000 to $20,000 per kilometer.
Got it. I mean, that's a pretty wide variance. What are some example fiber counts that we're dealing with in the market today?
Yeah. So that's something else that's kind of shifting. In the 2000s, it would be it's like less than 10. You think about four fiber pairs,
Like,
six.
kind of blows my mind. It's like you go through this huge infrastructure project and you have 10 fiber repairs, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
right. Well, it's more these days.
Right.
Now you're thinking 16, 24 fiber pairs. And again, that's
Hmm.
pairs. So it'd be double that in the number of actual fibers.
Right.
Yeah. You can't do more, at least not right now, because the repeater technology is limited. So this
I
is
see. I
for,
see. So
and
that's a
I should
limitation.
say, this is for repeatered systems, would be those fiber pair counts. If it's an unrepeatered
Uh,
cable, which is shorter, you
mhm.
can pack just a lot more fibers in it.
But those are going to be pretty small systems, like like maybe crossing the English Channel or something like that, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
100 kilometers, couple hundred
Hmm.
kilometers. Yeah. There was anything in transoceanic is going to be in the thousands of kilometers.
Right. Got it. Right. Makes sense. Okay. So you mentioned the repeaters. there's a cost associated with them as well. What does it look like to buy if I want to go down to the submarine cable store and buy
Yeah.
a repeater? What does that look like?
A couple 100,000 per repeater.
Wow. Okay. All right. So that definitely adds up when you're saying they're needed every like less than 100 kilometers or so, right? So
Yes.
interesting. Yeah. Wow. All right. Okay. So this is starting to make sense. All right. Wet plant, dry plant. What we have some costs associated there as well, right? So
Yeah. You need a landing station. It'll be
right.
cheaper if you can land in a station that already exists. Obviously, it costs more to
Mm-hmm.
build out new infrastructure. You're going to have to deal with the bore pipes,
Right.
get a beach manhole, get a building, not to
A
mention all of
big
the equipment in
fence,
it.
right? There's lots of security, I reckon, right? So yeah,
Ideally, a big fence, yes.
yeah.
Uh, some security cameras too, maybe. So if there's existing infrastructure on hand and it's good,
Hmm.
it's nice to be able to go into that and save a couple $1 million.
Yeah, no doubt. Interesting. Are there cases where there's already a sort of data center near to the shore that people just turn into a CLS? Is that a thing that happens?
Yeah, and it's something that's happening more often now is you can
Mm.
land directly in cable landing stations. I'm
Hmm.
sorry, in data centers instead of a
Right.
traditional cable landing station.
Hmm.
Um, there's limitations for how far inland you can do it, and oftentimes you'll still
Mm.
end up with what's called like a PFE hut. So a power feeding equipment hut that'll be
Hmm.
somewhere near shore and that can
I see.
supply the power to the repeater still, and then just feed on that optical signal further into the data center itself.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. And transmission and power equipment a cost as well, I assume, right?
Yes.
So
Mhm.
all right. So we got wet plant and dry plant. Any other cost areas for building a cable?
I mean, you need all of the staff to have planned this project for a couple of
Mm.
years.
It's a big
You
project.
need,
Yeah.
oh, yes. And one of their main jobs is going to be the permitting and dealing with governments.
Ah, right. Of
All of
course. Yeah,
that can
there's a
incur
cost of that.
costs.
Yeah.
Yes. You need to thoroughly plan the route of the cable. So you're probably hiring a contractor, someone to go out and do a route survey, any environmental reviews or permits you need. All of that adds up.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. It's just a logistical nightmare, I would say. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we build a submarine cable, right? Then we have to run a submarine cable. So take us through some of the OpEx, right, components like keeping the cable running and operating.
Yeah. So again, the staffing, any administrative jobs on hand, regulatory compliance, powering the cable landing station, all of that is going to run up a bill in millions per
Hmm.
year,
Interesting.
maybe
Yeah.
like 4 to 10 million, somewhere in those low millions ballpark on the
Right.
annual. Um, you also have to have cable maintenance, right? As we said, cables break.
Right.
We have to fix them. So cable operators themselves don't have repair ships, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
just a different business. So
Hmm.
they, again, pool resources together.
Right.
Maybe in like a consortium agreement, you can do a consortium maintenance. And that is a separate company that has a ship on hand or multiple ships around the world or in a certain area that are ready to go out and fix the cable as soon as they're notified that it's a problem.
Hmm.
That it's been there's a fault or a break or what have you. There's been an earthquake. There's been a fishing vessel, etc. Per repair, that's in the low millions again. So it's going to be maybe two
Hmm.
million per repair.
Right.
And the cable operators are going to have to pay to reroute traffic around that break.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't have thought of that immediately. That they are leasing service to people, and they have to keep that service leased, even
Yes.
if the cable is not operating. Interesting.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
have guarantees in place to they let's just say it's financially necessary to maintain as high a possible service guarantee as you can.
Hmm. Right.
So even
Right.
even in
Right.
the
Of
instance of a
course.
break, they want to be able to offer services.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm actually going to do one of these submarine cable series episodes with our colleague Alan and Mike Constable, who's worked with us on that cable fault study that we did. So I'll take a much deeper dive there. But suffice to say, I assume these cable repair ships are pretty taxed these days with the number of cables we have out there, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
So I helped
yeah,
them with that project, the cable maintenance
hmm
deal we've done. And that'll be a really interesting episode. I would encourage everyone to listen into that as we
yeah,
did a study about how many cable ships are going to be required over the next like 15 years until
hmm
2040, which is a pretty far out try to estimate, like we
yeah, sure,
normally
for sure,
it's
yeah,
these content providers these days and everybody companies don't know their own bandwidth requirements beyond a
right,
couple of years.
hmm hmm
But we have a pretty limited number of cable ships around the industry right now, and there's a lot of talk about whether they need to be replaced, whether new ones will need to be built. Again, there's a lot of new cable investment happening, um, and it does seem like there's going to need to be billions, millions in
yeah,
cable ships as well.
yeah. So hopefully we're helping the industry sort this out. All right, so we now understand what goes into building and maintaining a submarine cable system, regardless really of who owns it at this point, right? That's all the same. If you have an owner whose goal is to lease, service on this cable, so that they can make money, what does that look like? So I assume, well, not I assume. This part I know, right? That we have contracts, right? That vary from, like, 1 to 5 years, that sort of thing. What do the contracts look like in the submarine cable business? What are the types that we see?
Yeah, you used to be a pricing analyst, weren't you, Greg?
Yes, exactly.
You were
So
on our
yeah,
pricing
so
team, so you probably know this
yeah.
stuff at least as well as I do. But you're totally right.
Well, it's been a long time, so it's better for you to go through it. Yeah. So yeah.
Absolutely, sure. So there's as you mentioned, there are shorter term called like leases, and they're
hmm
going to have term lengths of maybe 1 year, maybe 5 years. These are options that are much more flexible for buyers, and you can also
Right.
help take advantage of any price erosion that happens over time. So as we mentioned before, as the
hmm
amount of supply that goes into the bandwidth market increases, the price per unit of the supply decreases.
Right.
So
Right.
it's advantageous for buyers to want to switch up their contracts every couple of years because then you might be able to get your bandwidth at a lower rate. And that's what you
Right.
get with leases. The
hmm
other main type of contract you're going to deal with is an IRU. That's an
hmm
indefeasible right of use. These are going to be longer 10, 15, 20 years. And this is treated a little bit differently from a company. So it'd be like considered an asset on your balance sheet. This is
Right.
something that
Right.
you quote unquote own.
So some of that is down to how you want to, as the buyer, do the accounting on this kind
Yes.
of thing, and some of it is how much you want to hedge against what you were talking about, the continual erosion of pricing, right? So obviously, a bunch of 1 year terms. There's a lot of transaction costs, and you have to renegotiate and things like that. But you're taking advantage of this falling prices, whereas the IRU, you negotiate ahead of time. The amount of decrease should be relatively known because they should be subscribing to telegeography and knowing what the prices are going to look like.
It should
So,
plug. Nice.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. All right, and so what are the typical products? Like how would we call this as a product from a buyer perspective?
Yeah. So the big ones here are going to be either dark or lit, right? So you can
hmm
have dark fiber and think of this as like a dumb pipe. This
Right,
is buying a fiber pair or even like partial on a subsea cable system. It's going to be treated as an IRU, and
hmm
then the operator goes in. I'm sorry, the buyer, right?
right.
I mean, they're also
Which
operators,
is an
but
operator, right? Yeah,
yes, I
absolutely. Yeah.
clarify for this explanation, right?
hmm
The buyer goes in and provides their own transmission equipment at the shore to like quote
Right.
unquote light that fiber.
hmm
And then the other version is lit services. This is typically wavelengths. Um, this is where the cable owner, that operator, is the one providing transmissions equipment. They are lighting the
hmm
cable and then selling bits of capacity from that to others.
Right.
And that's going to be in units like 10 gigabits per second, 100, increasingly 400. And that's how they're
hmm
splitting it up.
hmm And Lane, do we at Telegeography in our research have a feel for the balance between these two things? Like, are most customers opting for lit service, or do carriers tend to want to get dark fiber?
Yeah, dark fiber is rare.
Hmm.
It's definitely not as common, and it's often something that ends up negotiated as part of the initial build plan for the subsea
Mm.
fiber.
It's like
So
an anchor tenant,
typically,
if you will. Yeah.
yes, and
Hmm.
they end up counting as like an owner on the system
Hmm.
a lot of the time.
Hmm.
Usually, the companies that require that much capacity, if you need like multiple fiber pairs, whatever, they get in on the front end and they're helping plan the systems out.
Got it.
Also, it's rare because, well, there really didn't used to be that many fiber pairs to go around for dark fiber,
Right.
right?
Right.
And as the number of fibers per cable is increasing now, there's a chance to see a little bit more of that.
Okay, so thank you, Lane. We understand now what it is that the submarine cable systems are selling. Let's talk about how much that costs, right? So the first question that comes to mind for me here, again, full disclosure, having been a pricing analyst for a long time that used to focus on the wholesale market. I haven't done that in 10 years, so things have changed, but this doesn't, right? That distance still impacts pricing, I assume, right?
It does some. It
Hmm.
probably doesn't quite as much as what intuitively makes sense, right? Because
Right.
ah, we've distance has not been conquered, right? If you're going
Right.
further, it costs more to build the cable,
Hmm.
and it costs more to power the cable. But
Right.
distance is not anywhere near like the biggest factor in how much capacity on the system costs.
Hmm. Hmm. That's really interesting. So let's take a concrete example. The transatlantic you mentioned, a lot of routes are around 7,000 kilometers. Trans-Pacific routes are around 15,000. Obviously, it depends on the exact geography. One, the price is not 2x on the Trans-Pacific because it's 2x the distance. And two, it's I would assume that a big difference in the prices, because the prices are very different, transatlantic versus transpacific, right? Has to do with the amount of supply that you would find on those routes more so than the distance. Is that accurate?
Totally. So around the world, routes and places where you have the greatest amount of supply is generally where you also see more competition, and then you're also
Hmm.
going to see generally lower prices, and it can
Right.
vary, pretty substantially. um, so like the transatlantic is the biggest global route. It
Right.
has the most demand, and it's also a bit of a weird case because it is, over 90% content provider used.
Right. Right.
So there's much lower prices on that route than you would see in the Trans-Pacific, but it's not distance based as much as related to those market dynamics.
Hmm.
Trans-Pacific, the cables themselves cost more. You're probably getting less capacity per system, but there's still a good amount of supply and there's still a good amount of competition as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Is this a place, Lane, where the shelf life of these cable systems does come into play? Like, first, there, what is roughly the shelf life? I know that's changed over time as well. And two, how might that impact the pricing dynamics on a particular route?
Totally. So when a new cable enters service, that can really impact local pricing.
Hmm.
Well, it's local as in to the route,
Right.
um,
Right.
because you're creating that giant influx of supply. But
Right.
the old cables, they don't just stay there forever, right?
Hmm.
Older systems, you can add supply to them by upgrading them, but eventually they are decommissioned and put out of service.
Hmm.
Traditionally, the number of years, like if you just want to benchmark it for a repeated subsea system, it's going to be about 25 years.
Got it.
That is the called the engineering lifespan of the cable. So the
Hmm.
wet plant is made to last that long at least.
Hmm.
The cable itself, and I have actually behind me, I'm at my desk here in DC. I have some old telegraph systems. I have some
Oh, cool.
old
Yeah.
segments, and they're interesting to see
Hmm.
because they sat on the seabed for so long, and
Yeah.
they look normal. It just looks like a regular. I mean, it's obviously a different technology. It's copper, but
Hmm.
there's no like worn holes in it. It's stuff, at least
Right.
what I
Right.
have, because these are really inert materials, and what they're
Hmm.
using for cables now, it can last on the seabed especially if left undisturbed, for a really, really long time.
Gotcha.
But the minimum is 25 years. They're usually pulled up about then or soon after, and sometimes even
Mhm.
before, because what's really going to matter is what's called the economic lifespan of that cable.
Mm-hmm.
So that is roughly the point where a company is making money by having that cable in the water. When they
Right.
stop making money and they're no longer required to have it in their waters, or it's not providing any sort of substantial resilience or government related benefit, then
Mhm.
the cable is usually pulled up.
Got it. All right. That makes sense. And they would stop making money basically because the cost of keeping that older cable up with the most, modern equipment that can transmit 100 gig waves, for example, or whatever, just outweighs the amount that they could get back from leasing service versus just building a new cable, basically.
Yeah, and that relates to the price erosion we mentioned, and then
Hmm.
increasing bandwidth demand, and also the fact that new subsea cables have greater and greater capacities all of the time. So as the technology is improved in the wet plants, you can fit more fibers in the cable. You can do multi-core, someday maybe hollow core, whatever. As what's in the wet plant is able to be improved on new cables, they have greater
Hmm.
capacities, which continues to drive down pricing, which
Right.
makes the amount of capacity available on older systems potentially worth less.
Right. So you mentioned multi-core. What is that? I need a refresher on that, and why does it increase supply, as you suggested?
Yeah, so there's a lot of new frontiers in
Hmm.
subsea cable. I think it's one of my favorite parts about subsea cable is that there's always something new to learn. And one
Hmm.
of those areas is in the mechanical engineering and the physics.
Right.
So to continue to expand the amount of capacity that we can fit through a subsea cable, changes essentially need to be made to the wet plant. In the
Right.
early 2000s, you could continue to upgrade these systems using different shore end technologies after they had entered service. So you could, change out a wave card or whatever, the tech at the shore, at the cable landing station, and use that to transmit more light through the same cable,
Right.
and get more capacity out of it. Now, as the industry is approaching the Shannon limit and different like technological limitations, you can't just continue to do that unless we can get to the L band, right? Is this do a sorry, C plus L that's increasing the amount of wavelengths that you can send, uh,
Right. Right.
different colors
So
of light
more
essentially down the cable.
efficient use of the spectrum, if you will, on the fiber.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Hmm.
Um, so that is not something that's infinitely
Hmm.
improvable, right? So the cable itself, there's a lot of new ways that you can potentially get capacity out of it. And that's by putting more fiber pairs in, which again is limited by repeater technology, or even like ship capabilities, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then there's also, as I said, multi-core, much closer on the horizon than hollow core. But
Hmm.
anyway, so within a subsea cable, you have lots of optical fibers. And then
Right.
within those optical fibers, there's a tiny core. And that is what the light is actually sent down, and then it bounces
Hmm.
off the edges of the cladding, that's around, again, that tiny hair sized optical fiber.
Wow.
Multi core is putting two or four or however many of those tiny cores in each optical fiber. And
Wow.
then, so you can,
Inside the human hair width fiber, you're putting
yes,
multiple places for the light to bounce and thereby increasing the potential capacity.
it's just incredible. Yeah,
Yeah, we need an animation of this. I think I need to work on. We need to
totally.
get one of those AI engines. That's really cool. Yeah, that is fascinating. Okay,
Mhm.
so
So
the
that's
newer
on the
systems are
horizon.
going to be built with this multi-core fiber, which again uh, greatly increases the supply and lowers prices. Right. So
Theoretically, yes.
yeah, interesting. Okay, so all right, so let's do a sort of little recap, right, before we get into the owners, right? We have folks who spend this money laying the cables. They do that sometimes with anchor tenants, so to speak, using IRUs, buying dark fiber. Mostly they do that to sell lit service. That lit service goes to whoever, it's other carriers, internet providers, enterprises that need large amounts of capacity, that kind of thing,
Content
right?
providers too, yeah.
Content providers, right? Yeah, good, very good point. As a huge amount of the demand, those prices are constantly going down, but the amount of capacity needed is constantly going up, and so there's this balance there of like we're still making money because we sell so much capacity. The unit cost is really low, but the unit is 400G. Then that's still a substantial monthly cost, right? Of to the buyer, monthly income to the owner. What I want to get into now that complicates all of this is the content providers being the owners, right? One, I assume they have little interest in selling capacity, right? So they're not entering the business for that same reason. They're entering the business as a cost, not as a money making thing. And two, obviously, I assume a lot of their demand is being withdrawn from the traditional consortium kind of cable providers or proprietary pure play cable providers, right?
Yeah, so it's something that I think the industry is keeping a really close eye on. And it's hard
Mm-hmm.
not to keep an eye on it because it's so like in your face all the time, right? Of
Right.
like Google announcing new systems, Meta announcing new systems, all this like single investment. That's really, I mean, if you look at our map and the planned cables that are coming, a ton of them are content providers. For the Atlantic, it's like 100% of the new plans and new builds are content
Mm-hmm.
provider. In the Pacific, it's like 80%. So it's on these huge like global routes, it's massive amounts of content provider investment. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned, that capacity used to be able to be sold by other cable operators, people
Right.
that in the wholesale market that were building out cables to sell to companies like content providers, right,
Mm-hmm.
can no longer do so, at least not with these companies that have gotten so large that they're just building out their own systems.
Right.
So that's a huge chunk of the cable operator customer base that has moved
Mm-hmm.
away.
Yeah.
Now the amount of we can't just the industry doesn't make an infinite amount of cable per year.
Right.
So a lot of the difference there is you can just see where content providers now are just taking that from the total kilometers that are made and just making it themselves. So the
Mm-hmm.
the wholesale people are just making fewer cables as a result.
Right. That's interesting. Right. And so that almost becomes they're almost like parallel markets, if you will. Right. So as you mentioned at the top, that while we've flipped from sort of backbone providers being 75% to content providers being 75%, that market was still growing at a rate that market the backbone market would have grown. And so there's almost like content providers are over here doing their own thing, and economically that's almost like separate from the market that was for just traditional like selling capacity to ISPs and large enterprises and things like that.
I think you could say that. And it's
Hmm.
also different because, as you mentioned, the content providers aren't interested in selling lit services. So
Right.
they're
Right.
not
So they're not
they're not
competing on a sales sort of standpoint. They're not
not necessarily.
lowering the prices more that way. Right. Yeah.
There are instances like on Google's new cables, they're going to offer
Hmm.
up fiber pairs.
Interesting.
So
But as dark fiber, not as lit service, they're not going to
yes,
become a telecom provider.
yeah,
Right. So,
because that's not what their
mhm.
money is. That's not the
Right.
content provider business model is
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
operating as a telecom entity.
Hmm.
They are building out as many cables as they are now is almost like to hedge their bets. It's
Right.
saying that as a content provider, the bigger risk for us is having too little capacity as compared
Hmm.
to too
Hmm.
much. Because too much isn't a risk for them if they have the money.
Right. It's a risk
Whereas
for
for
maybe the
traditional,
rest of the market, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
for
yeah,
everyone else, it's
yeah,
almost flipped, where they would say if
yeah.
there's too much
Hmm.
on the market, then that drives prices down too low, and we won't be able to make money.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
how they have to weigh these different factors is just entirely separate.
Right, right. That is really interesting. All right, so this is going to be a big unanswerable question, maybe.
Ooh, okay.
But given everything that we've said, do you think that building and operating submarine cables is a profitable business in the 2020s here?
I mean, It depends on where.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's, it's in the name, folks. Telegeography. One of the things that we do when I explain to people what I do, it's economic geography. It is
Yes.
why place in the world matters to the economics of things. So that's a perfect example
And
here,
place
right?
is
So
critical. You
yeah.
can't ignore it. Sometimes people
Hmm.
forget about the impact of geography. As I said, like we have not conquered distance.
Hmm.
But it's just woven into everything about the economics of these things. So there's from an individual cable revenue perspective, there is not always bandwidth demand between two places. And so
Right.
you
Even
can
though
build
someone
out,
wants to build a cable there, right? So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
there's a hole on the map theory that's like, okay, well, there's not
Hmm.
a cable between these two places, so I'm gonna go out and
Right.
build one. And
Hmm.
that type of prospecting
Right.
is not you can't assume revenue. You can't assume the profitability of that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, but for the rest of the market, I think these cables keep getting built because there is profit to be made in them.
Right. Right.
Because at the minimum, they are a necessary component of internet infrastructure that provides revenue, if not through the cable itself, but through other ways for that telecom provider. So there's a
Hmm.
number, even within what we've talked about, of different ways to think about the profitability of subsea cable, and then different revenue schemes for how companies intend to get value out of this massive infrastructure build out.
Hmm.
So you can build it out as like a carrier's carrier. So like I'm building a subsea cable in this route, and then this is how I'm going to make my money. And
Right.
if you're on the right route, that can be a great way to make money. Or say I'm going to build a cable between here and here because I have this profit generating network, and this cable is necessary for that network, and I will be able to recoup costs through other ways. Or
Right.
maybe you're getting government grants or any
Mm-hmm.
variety of
Mm-hmm.
money gathering schemes or whatever to,
Yeah.
to to
Right.
feed into this overall picture of profitability.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think ultimately, one of the supply, it seems to me, is fairly knowable, right? In other words, you can go into your telegeography portal, for example, and know pretty well what the potential capacity on a given route is, right?
Hmm.
The demand is much harder to know, right? So with AI and other things that might well end up generating just massive amounts of traffic. So far in my experience in this industry, and I'll be curious to get your take, it seems like for as long as I've been hearing carriers talk about this, there's been this concern, right? That like, oh man, is the amount of internet that people need going to keep up with the amount that my prices keep having to go down? So
Hmm.
far, it seems like the answer is yes, and then some, right? So
Yeah, I think that the industry is very aware of the history of the boom and the bust, right, from like
right,
the dot-com
right,
era. So
hmm
I think that fear
hmm
stayed with people. And even looking
hmm
at anytime a new trend pops up or a new whatever, that's always the concern of like content providers are investing so much more. Is that going to cause the collapse? Because everyone
right,
remembers the collapse and it was
right,
so, devastating.
right,
Um, and so that's something that really weighs on people. You
yeah,
mentioned
yeah,
AI. I'll,
hmm
I'll flip it around on you.
please, yeah,
We don't really know the impact. I mean, I can talk about inference and how different things are likely to potentially impact
hmm
bandwidth demand, but especially on subsea cables for that long haul demand, it's a bit of a crapshoot right now.
yeah, I agree.
Things can change because after all, what if we can use AI to reduce AI's bandwidth demand or whatever to
That is
make
plausible.
make
Yeah,
traffic or make it more efficient, to make things
yeah.
routed better or whatever. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
never
Yeah,
know.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, AI can be used to do better networking. That's
Mhm.
one place to look at it, right? And so that to cut down on the demand through just smarter networking, and some of that is because in the world that we live in now, it is still the case that a lot of traffic does not follow the smartest routes at all times, right? You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah.
So traffic routing by AI on a real time basis could lower demand in a sense because you have traffic going directly to its destination. I think the other side of that coin is that everything that's been developed, and you mentioned inferencing, every time you're training a model, and you're doing that mostly locally, so it's not going to impact submarine cables. But
Hmm.
then that model is going to be spread around the world. And I think what we don't know yet is like, what does that bandwidth look like, right? So sure, whatever kind of model you want to imagine. Let's say I have a bunch of IoT devices, and they're pinging a GPU cluster in a hyperscaler environment. Um, how much bandwidth is that going to generate moving whatever that sort of model comes up with all around the world to other instances of the model? It seems like that could be huge. You know what I mean? Yeah, but it's really hard to know. Yeah.
It's it is hard to know, and it's something that I think a lot about with like caching. As people when
Hmm.
they first learn about the internet and subsea cables and how all of this works, they say, okay, well, I'm streaming must be such a huge part of international bandwidth demand is getting these like
Right.
movies and content out to people.
They just have to go
Um,
once, right?
they
Yeah.
just go once to a
Yeah.
cache. So I'm sure
Right.
that, or my opinion, is that AI is almost certainly going to impact intra metro demand, but I'm not
Big.
sure what the
Yeah.
impact on
Exactly.
subsea cable is going to
On
be.
right, exactly. On that's the piece that's harder to know. It's a little bit easier for me to envision it with streaming. So it's just like you say. So like if there's a movie that is on Netflix and is now popular in a market on another continent, you
Hmm.
can literally send that movie one time.
Yep.
With AI, that may be the case for certain models. It may not, because it may be that model is changing every single day because we're going to have constant input, and so there's a lot more sort of moving that model to its other homes around hyperscaler locations around the world. That's I Is that a lot of data? That's the part that I think we're sort of yet to figure
Yeah. Just
out.
speculating
But
about. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. From the individual sort of like, I'm one enterprise and I'm building an AI model from that. You're right. It's mostly about metro traffic. It's creating from my offices where my engineers or whoever sit, and they need to build a data lake and interact with that model, and sort of use the sandbox at the hyperscaler. Yeah, that's a lot of local traffic, but it's really hard to know how much of that goes between continents. So it's really, I think, fascinating for the impact on the submarine cable market. Right, that there's this big question mark. You mentioned
Yes.
at the start of the show that there's a lot of cables planned for the rest of the decade. I guess my question to you, now that we've gone through all of this, the cost, the demand, the prices constantly falling because of those increases in supply, and then the removal of demand from the content providers, sort of building their own. What do you expect to see in submarine cable development over the next for the remainder of the decade? Right.
I think you said it best at the beginning. There's lots of new cable.
Hmm.
There's a
Hmm.
ton of build out happening, and until we learn or like develop the technologies needed, and that ideally will come in the next several years as well, if to continue to increase the capacity per cable to
Right.
meet increasing bandwidth demand, you just need more cables.
Yeah.
And there's limitations on how many cables you can have, again, by how many can be produced per year and how many can be
Hmm.
reliably maintained per year, based on fault projections. But until the technology really improves, the number one solution for increasing the amount of bandwidth that you have out there is by adding more cables.
Absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
would also add, just as a topic, because I feel like we're closing soon, that
Hmm.
just in case there's any regulatory oriented folks listening, that permit delays have a really substantial impact on cable economics and how revenue, like how profitable a cable can be over time. Because
Absolutely.
as we mentioned, with these different levers happening all the time that impact pricing, amount of bandwidth up, price down, capacity up, whatever, um, at the very beginning of a cable's lifespan, the capacity, the price per unit, right, that you can
It's the
get,
best it's ever going to be. Right.
that's the best.
Yeah.
It's never going to
Yeah.
get better than that
Yeah.
because price always
Right.
goes down. And
Right.
so when cables get pushed, and I mentioned they get pushed all the time,
Hmm.
it's they can run into technical problems. There's a example I have here I wanted to bring up to you is like SJC2, this cable
Mm.
in Asia, was initially planned to enter service in Q4 of 2020, and it
Wow.
is still
Yeah.
not in service. right?
And think of the IRUs that they likely sold, and
Yes,
their profitability model was going to be based on 2019 probably lit service prices, and I
yes,
can
which have
tell you
changed
that prices
dramatically.
are not what were in 2019, right? So
No.
yeah.
So
Hmm.
so anytime a cable gets pushed by even a year,
Hmm.
those seemingly short regulatory delays, I mean, just massive impact on whether or not that cable
Yeah.
will ever make money.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah, I think that's a great point to close out on. So a plea for the sort of push the economics of this, because ultimately, really, truly, I know this. Telegeography has an interest in the submarine cable market, and we're observers. But a healthy market is certainly good for us. But a robust submarine cable market is good for the
Everyone.
global economy.
Yes.
Everyone in the world. It's good for education. It's good for like for the development of all kinds of economies that used to be underserved. When a submarine cable starts landing, that's accessible to that economy, it makes a huge change, right? So,
Yes. It's
um,
consumed like a public good,
yeah,
but it's produced like a private one, you
right.
know?
Right, exactly. Which is why this industry is so interesting, right? It's like
Yes.
we would not probably be, sort of talking about remotely similar things if we were, utility analysts, right? You
Oh,
know what I mean?
it's
So
never boring here.
yeah,
Never.
exactly. Yeah. Excellent. Well, Lane, that was super interesting and illuminating for me, and I'm sure it will be for the listeners as well. Thank you so much for sharing some of your expertise. And how can folks keep up with what you do at Telegeography or wherever?
Well, Telegeography has podcasts, and we have a blog, and I am way
Yeah.
too active on LinkedIn. So
Yes. Well,
you can find me
that's
there.
good. Yeah,
Yes.
you should give me some tips because I really need to up my LinkedIn game. I am just
Oh,
I'm not a
man.
good social media person. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
All right. Good chatting, Greg.
All right. Cheers. Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.